What's happening, everyone? SaberWolf94 here. Gonna show you my version of an old school deck, Dark Arm Turbo. Most people refer to this as Dark Arm Return. I'll show the deck first for those that just want to see the card list, my card list, and then I'll go in depth about the deck and my card choices. So we got our win condition boss monsters, Dark Magician of Chaos. You need 3 Dark Arm Dragon, of course, Dark Lord Zerato, Jinzo, mandatory engine regulator piece, Dark Griffer. It's an important one-of. Then we have the hero engine. Of course, we have Elemental Hero Stratos, 1 Dasher, the Diabolic Guy, or Destiny Hero Malicious as most people know it, Diamond Guy, this Commander, 1 Evil Hero Infernal Prodigy. You don't see that every day. I'm going to explain why it's here. Got the 1 of Sangan and the 3 Cyber Valley. So for spells, you gotta have triple Allure of Darkness, triple Destiny Draw, 2 Reinforcement of the Army, Machine Duplication, 1 DDR, Different Dimension Reincarnation, and then you got the 6 Saints, Dimension Fusion, Brain Control, Monster Reborn, Premature Burial, Heavy Storm, and Giant Tornado. Upstart Goblin at 3, make this a 37 deck, make it faster, make it thinner. And then for traps, we only have Crush Card Virus and 2 Return from a Different Dimension. So this deck was made possible with the release of Phantom Darkness, basically the pinnacle of dark attribute support. You know, the biggest card from that, Dark Arm Dragon, it was so powerful, it was so easy to summon, it was comparable to like Blackluster Soldier. It was like the new BLS at 3 pretty much. Which is why, you know, you see Dark Arm in, you know, the titles of so many decks of that format, and, you know, formats following that. The turbo part, I mean, obviously comes from, you know, the Allure of Darknesses and the D-Draws. It gave the deck so much speed, it was unheard of around that time. I mean, and other ways, I mean, the deck had ways to search and draw cards besides that. I mean, you had Disc Commander. This card was so powerful if you got to resolve it. I mean, even once, but, you know, being able to resolve it plenty of times in a deck like this, you know, it was pot of grease left and right. I mean, Elemental Hero Stratos. There's a lot of like replicas of this card today. A lot of, you know, on summon searches today. Amazing card. I mean, it's not worth being banned today, but still a great card. You had Cyber Valley. I mean, Reinforcement of the Army. There's two of these here. And I've included Upstart Goblins. People didn't really play Upstart Goblins back then, but I decided to include these on this version to make it even more turbo. But we'll talk about them later. I mean, obviously, Sangan could search. What else? You know, Dark Greffer and stuff like Foolish Burial can thin the deck. Machine Duplication, you know, would bring out cards from the deck. There's plenty of ways to make the deck, plenty of ways that the deck had speed going for it. That's why it was called Dark Arm Turbo. Now, most people refer to this as Dark Arm Return because of Return from a Different Dimension. The sickest play was basically, you know, you resolve Dimension Fusion or Return from a Different Dimension, and, you know, summon a bunch of monsters and then go for the OTK. This deck is basically the definitive version of Airblade, if you guys know what that is, because the concept, you know, is pretty much the same, only this deck has a bigger focus on, you know, dark monsters and boss monsters like Dark Arm Dragon. But the concept was, you know, you use Dark Magician of Chaos, you use Dimension Fusion, and obviously Dimension Fusion got hit to 1 then, so that's why you use Return from a Different Dimension, which is a slower card, in some regards better and in some regards worse, of course. And that's why it was called Dark Arm Return for the most part. But the concept was, you know, you resolve one of those cards, you know, you get a bunch of monsters, you get Jinzo, you know, they can't use traps, and then you OTK. Hand traps weren't really a thing back then. I mean, unless you want to count Karibo. But yeah, that was the concept. So Dark Magician of Chaos, This is like a boss win condition monster, but it was useful in so many ways, you know. Easy as hell to summon with stuff like Monster Reborn, Premature Burial, you know, removing it from play and then summon it with the Dimension Fusion or Return, you know, get a spell card back. You know, it was pretty good. You could make loops with this card, you know, and make loops with this card to draw cards using Cyber Valley, and then get all the pieces, get all the cards that you wanted together to make, you know, your complete play, you know, have a complete setup. You know, you could basically like draw cards like crazy in this deck, to the point that it was basically like you could add broken spells like Brain Control and Monster Reborn. You drew your entire deck. You drew so many cards with this deck when it got going. So, you know, it was like you could search those cards. You know, Dark Arm Dragon, obviously. This was the only format this card was at 3, sadly. You know, after the emergency ban list, it went to 2. Kind of stayed like that during Teledad. And then, you know, eventually it went to 1 because it's a great card. It's pretty self-explanatory. It was so strong back then. It's still a good card today, but back then, I mean, it was also like the priority was different back then. So if you summoned this guy and the bottom list, you could still destroy a card, you know, if you decided to resolve the effect on the summon. The crazy part with this card is that not only, you know, it popped cards so easily and it was an easy as hell summon 28 monster, but the cards you remove from play also synergized well with this deck strategy, because this deck took advantage of the graveyard and the remove from play zone so good. Dark Lord Zerato, this card was another like boss monster tech. You know, if you summoned it with you know, Dimension Fusion, or maybe you used Monster Reborn for that, you know, you could like use its effect as a Regeki, ditch a dark monster and it was Regeki for your opponent, and you know, it will help you go for game. Similar with Jinzo, you know, is a card used here to help with your OTK. Dark Grepher, this guy is also an important tech, one of. You know, depending on your deck, you would play more like 3 or maybe 2. 1 is enough for this type of deck. You know, instant Dark Arm Dragon, if you want to summon him. You know, ditch a monster, level 5 or 6 or higher monster, dark. And then you can special summon him freely. And it synergizes well with Cyber Valley, you know, if you wanted to resolve Cyber Valley and draw cards. Very good card again, very good tech. And then the Hero Engine, you know, of course we have Elemental Hero Stratos, like I said. You know, this card, you could add one of your heroes. Malicious was also one of the cards that, you know, maybe you would use with Cyber Valley. I mean, of course, if you summon Stratos, then you can normally summon Cyber Valley, but, you know, you use D-Draw, ditch Malicious, or use Dark Grepher's effect. And then you put Malicious in the grave. You could use Cyber Valley with him. Sometimes you could use him as tribute fodder, but it was in general a good +1, you know, monster. Diamond Dude, there's a lot of normal spells in this deck that you could resolve, and you know, I think there's like 15 spells in this deck, so you could resolve his effect pretty easily. But I mean, the biggest reason he's here is for fuel, for Destiny Draw. This Commander, possibly the most broken D hero, especially in this deck. You could draw like a madman with this card. You know, he's a D-draw target. Very good card. And the last hero, Evil Hero Infernal Prodigy. This is a hero card. Back then, a lot of cards that could special summon themselves freely didn't really exist. Cyber Dragon was the first card to do that, but you need it for your opponent to control a monster. And there weren't really cards like Jammer and Photon Thrasher that, you know, summon themselves for free or junk forward. There's actually, I think, the only card, or one of the only cards from back then. I mean, if you didn't want to use Fiend Sanctuary, which is a spell card, you know, the monster that is summoned was a token. This is also a hero card, a dark monster for a little darkness. And it actually has an effect that if you tribute a hero, if let's say you wanted to tribute Dasher, it was basically evened out. It was a 1-for-1. You drew a card in the end. That's what the effect was. But the important reason for this card is that you summoned it, you special summoned it in attack mode, had to be in attack mode, and then if you had Cyber Valley, then it was sort of like a mini sort of speed draw, because Cyber Valley, it needs another monster to remove for you to draw cards, and a lot of times you didn't have machine duplication, you wanted to make him live, you wanted to remove him from play, and that's why I thought, Evil Hero Infernal Prodigy, is a good card. If everything else fails, it's an alert target, it's a dark monster, crush card, virus target too. And speaking of crush card, virus target, Sangan, good all-around card. As people know, you could search many things. You could search basically all the D heroes besides Dasher. You could search the Cyber Valleys. And Cyber Valley, man, if this card was a dark attribute monster, you have no idea how much more broken it would be in this deck. So this card has 3 functions. It could be used as a stall card. The first effect, if they attack, you negate the battle phase, end the battle phase, and then draw a card. Pretty good effect, especially back then. Of course, they could destroy it. There were ways to go around it. The real, MVP effect, of course, the effect that lets you draw 2 cards. This is basically like in conjunction with DDR, different dimension reincarnation, dimension fusion, even return from a different dimension. And Dark Magician of Chaos, this is what caused loops. You could do that, a couple of times. If you had spell economics, you could do it forever. But that's another story of a deck. But you use this card, you do a bunch of cards. Even if you could resolve it only 2 times per turn, it was still good. And you drew more cards basically. And the third effect, while seldom used, was also important. It was basically you could stack one of your cards back into your deck. You had to remove itself and another card from your hand, but you could reuse potentially Dimension Fusion, and you can actually prevent yourself from decking out with this card if you have the right amount of cards, the right card, a return from a different dimension, for example. You can prevent yourself from decking out with a loop like that. Lure of Darkness, of course, such an important card. The part where it removes the monster instead of discarding is important because, like I said, this deck takes advantage of the remove from play zone and the graveyard amazingly. You would remove from play one of your dark monsters. Dark Magician of Chaos was the card you really wanted to remove most of the time. But anything to draw dead Dark Arm Dragons. And you do all your shenanigans with Dimension Fusion and whatnot. A Destiny Draw, more turbo, in conjunction with the D Hero engine, you draw cards. Reinforcement of the army, of course, consistency. Add your heroes, add your Grepher. Pretty standard. Machine duplication. If you had this with Cyber Valley, it was so nice, +2, you draw a bunch of cards. If you also had Evil Hero Infernal Prodigy, or you managed to send Malicious with D-Draw, maybe you had Grepher, you special summon him by ditching somebody, you could draw 4 cards easily thanks to that. Pretty good. Different dimension reincarnation. People ran this at maybe 1 or 2 or not at all, and they would opt to run 3 Return of the Different Dimension. I decided to go with this because number 1, it's a spell, so it's faster. The other reason is it forces you to discard a card as a cost, and that, of course it would seem bad, but a lot of the times you can make combos and you actually want to discard a card, and that's, you know, an enabler, discard outlet. And the important thing is, of course, is a spell card, you know, so it's much faster. A lot of the times you can't afford to set, return, and wait, or, you know, you can make combos in place if you could just resolve this card. So it's important. Dimension Fusion, of course. This card would be a 3 here if it wasn't at 1. Such a broken card. Amazing card in this deck. It's basically like your main win condition. You want to draw all your cards to see this. Remove from play a bunch of monsters. Then play this. Go for your OTK. If you have Dark Arm Dragon, you know, you summon him. You know, you pop everything. And then you go for game even better. Brain Control. Self-explanatory card. You know, take your opponent's shit. Even better in this deck, of course, because of all the combos you can make. You could use an opponent's monster for Saber Valley. You contribute, of course, for your monsters. And of course, you know, being recyclable with Black Magician of Chaos. Very important too. You could summon Jinzo. I mean, you could even summon Dark Lord Zerato. I mean, you know, it had the... you mainly used him for Ageki and you didn't really want a tribute for him. But I mean, occasionally it was possible because of his effect. You know, if you had 4 dark monsters with different names, it could be tribute summoned with 1 tribute. So maybe it would come up. And then we have Monster Reborn and Premature Burial. God, you know, it's hard to decide which is the most broken card in this deck because all of the cards, you know, they work so well. Like you could say this Commander made it so broken. You could say if it wasn't for Cyber Valley, this deck would be so much less crazier. You could say, you know, it was the Dark Arm Dragons, Magician of Chaos, you know, the allures of the D-Draws. And, you know, Monster Reborn, Premature Burial is the same. I mean, you could do so many combos with this card, you know. Get Dark Magician of Chaos, you know, you could do something like use Foolish Burial, send Dark Magician of Chaos, you know, then use Monster Reborn, get Dark Magician of Chaos back, and then get Monster Reborn back. You know, a simple combo like that. You know, obviously I do not run Foolish Burial in this version, but of course you could. So many other things you could do, like you use Monster Reborn for this commander, you know, draw 2, amazing. You know, Heavy Storm and Giant Tornado. You know, these were the cards, you know, for spell and trap removal. MST was also legal at 1, if I'm not mistaken, but it wasn't really necessary. I mean, you could use it, but I opted for more consistency cards and, you know, more power cards. Upstart Goblin. Normally, what people would run is they would run like more traps, like Torrential Tribute, Trap Dust Shoot, or Mind Control, or Mind Crush, sorry, which was at 1. People didn't really, you know, a lot people back then even ran decks with 41 cards or 42, but I decided to make this deck more turbo. Now, it is more difficult if your opponent has 10,000 life points to OTK, but I figured, like, if I can draw on my deck, you know, or draw a Crush Card Virus, you know, it's a win this way. And as we're talking about Crush Card Virus, this was also one of the broken ass cards in this deck, you know, before its errata. You know, there are plenty of targets, and obviously you can't search the card, but because you draw so many cards, you could easily see it. And it's another card actually that you could say, you know, the deck is broken and it's the most broken card in the deck, win condition on its own. And Return from a Different Dimension, like I said, you know, a lot of people run 3 of these, but I decided to go with 2 because it can clock, it can't be dead. And this is my version of the deck. It's basically as turbo as it can possibly be. I can't think of any ways to make it more turbo. You know, Reckless Greeds and stuff like that. You know, they're slow ways and they could cripple you. For what it's worth, you know, 2008, you know, is as good as it's gonna get. Other things you could run, The crazy thing about back then is a lot of cards that are busted were actually at 3 back then that you could run. Like I said, Solemn Judgment was at 3, you know, and you could use it. People opted not to use it, I think, because, you know, you already use a lot of cards that cost life points, like Dimension Fusion and Return. But you could actually use it, you know, for a more control-oriented version. Drop the upstarts or something. Royal Oppression, that card was also at 3, probably not very good in this deck, unless maybe you set up and then you play it, of course. But the thing is, if you set up with this deck, you know, you should win, and you want to win. You know, if you're going to go for your big play, you know, this is what you want to do. Especially since Return from a Different Dimension removes your monsters in the end. So, you know, if you don't win, you lose everything again. Other things, you know, for the hero engine, of course, you could run Plasma. I do have a version where, you know, there's Plasma and Scapegoats. Most people ran it that way back then. You know, Plasma was a good monster. But, you know, I opted for speed with this version. Upstart Goblins. You know, the tokens for Scapegoat you could also use with Cyber Valley. You know, and Scapegoat was at 1 back then. Something else you could do, you know, maybe you could run more Diamond Dudes, I guess. Another Diamond Dude, or another like D hero. Level 4 lower, have more targets for Rhoda. You know, you could run another Dark Grepher maybe. You could run Foolish Burial, like I've said. Another thing you could do is you could run the Dark Creator, you know, and more Plasmas actually. And have, you know, a monster that is a D-draw target and a trading target, and have a turbo version that way. You know, there's plenty of things to do, a lot of versions of this deck, many things to do if you decide to run it. Other than that, I mean, this is basically like the skeleton is almost the same for Teledad. I mean, if it wasn't for the emergency ban list, or any ban list, you know, that would hit the deck, a lot of the cards that you see here, you know, they'd be used in Teledad. Cards like Disc Commander, possibly Dark Magician of Chaos, it would have basically been this deck, you know, minus some cards, and, you know, you add the Tuner Psychic Engine and the Synchros, and then you have, you know, Dark Arm Return, Synchro, Teledad deck, you know, which is why I think this deck is important, and why it shouldn't be as forgotten as it is. I mean, of course, some people like remember this because it was so broken, because of the E-ban list. But, you know, because of that, you know, a lot of people also don't remember it. But anyways, I hope you found this video informative. I hope you like the deck, or maybe you find the deck at least interesting. This was pre-Teledad, like I've said, and hopefully some way we can somehow build it again. I really like this deck. I tried to build like a version that, you know, is based in the same concept, using the Cosmo cards, and I found some success. You know, it's interesting, but, you know, obviously a lot of pieces are necessary for it to be good. Anyway guys, I hope you enjoyed. Thanks for watching.